Hello, everybody, and happy August. I can't believe it's August. This is crazy. It's literally the last full month of summer, and I can't believe it. Like, so many amazing things have happened. And first of all, the Olympics is just phenomenal. Gymnastics was so good. And fun fact, like, took gymnastics when I was younger, and my dad didn't keep me because he didn't want me to get injured. But I really love the gymnastics portion. I also love the ice skating portion, but I think gymnastics is by far my favorite. And they did so good. Like, the first man from the Philippines won first in gymnastics, like, historically. That's so awesome. And we're doing well, I think. I haven't been able to catch up like too much, but it's been at least good. Like, the stuff that I'm hearing all over the news and Twitter, or I guess X now at this point, but it's just so cool. So I think besides that, I'm trying to think of what else happened this whole week. Like, I did, I did dye my hair brown now, and like, I'm brunette. RIP to the blonde days, because one, it literally like is so expensive to get your hair dyed nowadays. But even on top of that, I'm just like, I feel like the past 4 or 5 years I've been constantly getting my hair dyed, and it's just been so hard to like keep up with it. So I'm really excited, actually, because it's just one of the many things I'm like removing from my body, just because I want to keep it all natural nowadays and like stick to the soft girl era and just try to be as natural as possible and not have to like spend so much money on those things. And I have a ton of catching up to do with my bills and whatnot, just because of just everything. But I don't know. I feel like the past 2, 3 weeks or whatever have been stagnant, I guess. Like, a repetitive, you know, eat, sleep, work, repeat. I don't know. And I think that it has triggered me to talk about what we're going to talk about today, which is reconnecting with our inner child. And I think that it's something that, one, we don't always have the time to do, but two, it's super important to still, I guess, reconnect with our inner child. And there's a ton of meanings behind like what that means to a listener. It's very unique to the listener. Like, there's a lot of things that maybe you don't want to reconnect to, but at the same time, it's things that, held up a big part of your life. And it's hard because, when we grow up, especially in our 20s, there's so many like moving parts that sometimes we're so hyper focused on like our goals and trying to accomplish the big things. I mean, there's a lot of things to accomplish at this time in our lives, like getting married, getting a job, like having kids, or setting up your future with retirement. Do I want to put my money here? Do I want to put my money there? And it's just so crazy that like when I graduated college, I was like, I am so excited to be an adult and do all these adult things. And here we are. I'm just still struggling to, I guess, like keep my head on straight in terms of just like, being an adult, but also reminding myself that like it doesn't have to be the same routine every single day. And granted, it's hard nowadays to like even, I don't know, make time for the things, because like work is surprisingly, like, I always told myself I wouldn't ever let work take over my life, and it doesn't. Like, it definitely doesn't. I'm not about to change my mind on that, and I still live and breathe by that. However, like, I'm finding that like even work right now, it's hard to, I guess, disconnect on days when I'm not working or like after work, because either I still have stuff to do after work, or it's just been so incredibly like stacked that I can't find the ways to come down from work after. So I think that in a way, it's very easy to get lost in that just automatic routine life. But, we were all children at once. And I think that it blows my mind because, like, I don't know. I mean, the only reason why I'm thinking about this is because of like The Bachelorette. I know it's kind of not related, but it kind of is because, first of all, the Bachelorette this season is an Asian woman. And I totally love that because I think it's the first time we're getting some sort of Asian representation on The Bachelorette. And she's different, like, in the sense that, like, she likes to do things that are kind of like thrilly, like skydiving or bungee jumping, or like I couldn't think of like the exact stuff right now, but like she goes to wineries and just does a bunch of like thriller stuff. And the most recent episode, without like spoiling anything, she was just saying that she has a connection with somebody where she feels all the fun things, like they connect by having fun, by being goofy. And I don't know, just put me in perspective, because like I just think it's crazy that even being goofy is like a requirement right now for looking for somebody to be with forever. And it rightfully should be, because you don't want all of life to be just serious and all about financials and talking about not fun things, because they're not fun sometimes. Like, but that is why it got me thinking. I'm like, damn, like I don't think I've had a full day to myself where I was me, like younger me, and doing things that younger me liked. And I think that just, again, it's hard to put aside a full day, but I think that I would like to work more towards that, especially just the fact that there's so many things, even as an older child or older adult, in our 20s, there's a lot of things that we as children were not aware of until after the fact. And I think that also ties into just healing yourself. And it's kind of crazy because I feel like there's a lot of my childhood that I don't remember, and I don't think it's trauma related. I mean, it could be, who knows? Like, I feel like there's still so much of my past that like I haven't remembered and experienced for myself, and like reminded myself that it is the reason that I am who I am today. Like every single piece of my childhood, every single thing that I did and I loved, it made me who I am today. And I think that there's a side of healing that I think is important, like recovering from your past, but also like I think reconnecting with your inner child keeps you grounded as an adult. I think a lot of parents, for example, parents of young kids, because obviously you don't get to have as many opportunities as they grow older. I think that parents of young children are more lucky in the sense because I guess like having kids keeps you young, if that makes sense. And I think in that way, like that's when you kind of start to get in touch with your inner child again. Like it takes being around kids to kind of remind you of you as a kid. And I think that's just so interesting. Like I often think about a lot of the conversations that I have with my grandparents, and especially when they talk about the things they used to do as kids, like even card games, for example, they just light up. And it's because that was something that takes you back to days where you weren't worrying about a million things at once. And I think it's so crazy to like really just for a second, just sit there and think about all the things you have going on in your life. Like no matter who the listener is right now, no matter who is around you, like everybody has at least like 2 or 3 or 4 things going on in their life that they're constantly thinking about. And I very rarely know of a time where like I'm not thinking about all that stuff. And again, I just think it's so interesting because it just doesn't feel like we're relaxing as adults. But I often catch myself like when I'm doing things that kind of help me like stay in touch with my inner child. Like that includes honestly reading. I used to read so much as a kid, like especially with A Court of Thorns and Roses. That series has reawakened me to, and I think that's why the series has like now laid such a special part in my heart, is because it kind of reawakened, I guess, these like previous feelings that I used to have about how much I used to love reading. Like I used to read a lot, and it wasn't just, first of all, this is my first fantasy series, and I'm so happy it was the first series I read because literally obsessed. But that was the first fantasy series I've ever read my whole life, honestly. But before that, I was reading like manga books, horror stories, and just, well, Twilight, I guess, is considered a fantasy. I don't know. This is the first like fairy book that I'm reading, but it just triggered these very similar emotions I used to feel. And the thing is, that's why I love arts and books and music, just because it really does, if it's a good book, and this was by far my favorite, I felt so out of this world, like out of this planet, not here, in a good way. Like you got so lost in the books that you forgot that you have a doctor's appointment next week. You forgot that work is tomorrow. You forgot that you were on the train on your way to work. You forgot that you have to go to 3 birthday parties next weekend, 4 weddings in the next 6 months. You have to plan your honeymoon. You have to go on this trip, see that person. You forget all that for 1 second. And that is exactly how kids feel. I feel like we're, especially now, like growing up, we're always so forward thinking. And granted, I'm not saying that's a bad thing, because it's very important to also be forward thinking, but just to have a minute to just not, you know what I mean? And I think that it's awesome to do that and just not have your brain running on a million things at once, because it helps you not only just relax for a second, but it helps you reconnect to the things that used to make us happy. And it's a sad thought. Like, I'm very jealous of somebody who works in the same field as their like hobby or passions, like, for example, hobbies of mine are music, video games, and reading. Like, somebody who does video games for a career, even someone on live streams, I know that it's very hard to be the top streamer and make a ton of money, but people do. And honestly, like, I applaud them because they love what they do, and they stay playing, and it's something they love, and it makes them money, and they're happy with that. I think sometimes, like, it's very easy to get caught in work and just our daily routine of working to pay things off, to provide, to supply, to be there for your kids. And there's always so much around you that you forget that there's still a piece of you. And I used to say this at my last therapist, which I used to call her little Philline. And I would always say, like, little Philline feels like she's not getting enough attention. And a lot of times when we're tense, or, especially when we feel like our day is repeating and things like that, it is a lot of the fact that your inner child is seeking attention and craving attention. And I think that just, it makes me so sad, because I'm just like picturing this poor little child saying, like, hey, Philline, when can we play some music? When can we read again? When can we just not be talking about boring adult things? Because 9 times out of 10, like, okay, as adults, we don't find it that boring anymore, but looking at it as a child, they could care less about your 401k. They could care less about, you know, what you are getting for groceries. They could care less about all of the birthday plans you have coming. They just are stuck in this current moment and want to just explore the world and explore everything around them. And I feel like it's kind of like sad saying out loud because I feel like a part of me has lost that connection a lot. And again, it has to do with just how disconnected I feel with things that I love to do, like playing music and reading. And I think a lot of that is just one, I'm not the only person who's disconnecting from those things, right? If you're lucky, you still have friends who have the time for their passions. And I'm not going to blame parenting at all on anything, but truthfully so, it takes up a lot of your time. And so does working. And especially me, if you're commuting like 2 hours one way or just honestly burnt out after a long day, like sometimes the time to do those things, to be a child, like shortens, you know? And I think it's really hard. And I just think that we as adults now and as we get older, you know, the only thing is like life will just continue to get busy. And I think like being busy is, I'm not going to say lame, but because I can't find other words, I think it's a lame excuse to not continue exploring your inner child. And it helps you because one, it can help you cope with things. And when things get difficult, you can always not fall back per se, but at least there's something there to, you know, just make you happy. Like you don't need to rely on anybody for these things. Like if you used to like to color, they have adult coloring books now. Like you'll be surprised how it makes you feel when you do the things you used to love. I think the perfect example is during COVID. Like when I was in middle school and high school, I used to love playing video games like nonstop. Granted, I can't do that anymore because that would require me staying up late pretty much every single day because that's what I used to do. But Animal Crossing, The Sims, those were just a few games. But I used to play like Nintendogs and Call of Duty, like all those things. And it just brings me back to all these memories. So during COVID, like obviously we had to quarantine, and this is just one, like COVID was horrible and I never wish for a quarantine situation to happen to another generation ever again. But one of the greatest things that I think came up during that time is just my reconnection with video games. I did used to play, like don't get me wrong, but I almost feel like I've been stuck in this dependency on social media, on my phone, on things that kind of just rot your brain. And it's hard to stop. I still do it. Like after work, I'm scrolling for hours. And again, TikTok has taught me a lot, but it certainly does shorten the attention span. And I think that during COVID, like besides the social media reliance that I started to grow, I started playing Animal Crossing again. And I actually ended up playing with one of my family friends. Like, it was so cute. So I used to work in pharma at the time. And because of that, the COVID regulations didn't really like apply. Like I didn't have to work from home. Actually, I couldn't even physically work from home because when you're working in pharma, like similar to nurses, I mean, God bless the nurses at the time because they were doing much more work and had to be stronger in these situations. But I didn't have to work from home. But when I did have to, I would essentially wake up at 5 or 6 a.m. and I would just be awake because obviously that's the same time I'd wake up and drive to work. But I would wake up and I would play video games. And it was great because my family friend would be on at the same time. I absolutely loved that. And I think it was just cool because we'd either visit each other's towns, or like we would just play at the same time, and I had somebody to talk to about it. And that was wonderful because I felt like I was connecting to somebody, and we connect on a lot of different things, don't get me wrong, but I was connecting to somebody that didn't have to relate to work or life, just fun, wholesome things you honestly don't have to put too much brain power on. And like, again, I think about it as somebody who is a kid, because think about children. When they get frustrated, if something is too complicated, they don't care about it. They're like, this is too much for me, on to the next one, or I'm bored, what can I do now? And they go and try and explore and do different things. And as adults, we don't get that ability to do that anymore. And I think that's still a part of life that's super important in just our self-esteem, our emotional regulation, like keeping control of ourselves. I think there's a lot in our life that we can't control. And I've said this before. And I think one of the things we can control is just continuing to pay attention to our inner child. And I think there's things that we don't realize that we do, honestly, that can kind of call attention to the fact that we do need to do that and like reconnect with ourselves. And there's so many things. Like, you could be having, big reactions when someone's not meeting your needs or expectations, or you can't figure out why you're upset, or you're kind of like being a harsh critic to yourself, and many issues of just like expressing your needs, because there's so many things that, again, as kids, we didn't realize were affecting us negatively, or like things that we necessarily just like didn't know was going to affect us later in life. And I think there's a few things we can do, and it's not just about the play part of being a child, right? It's about like emotional intelligence. It's all the things that you didn't realize you should have cared about because we just weren't mentally, acknowledging it, or just mentally aware of that. And there's a lot of things we can do. I think one is, I always say, invest in yourself. Like, do some self-care, take care of yourself. Like, okay, maybe as a kid you were eating a bunch of McDonald's. That's literally my life. As much as I miss the Big Macs, as much as I miss the large fries, like, I don't eat that anymore as much, but I take care of my skin. It's a great example of self-love. And that's just something that we can do for ourselves that maybe growing up we didn't get to have as a child. And there's also a ton of other things, like even just meditating, or just being present, or reconnecting with your hobbies. Like, that it's been so hard for me to like reconnect with music. And I'm very grateful that reading has sparked a passion in me again, because again, it just teaches you ways on handling your emotions, and like gives you an outlet, right? My brother used to take karate, and that was something that I always, if you're going to think of like an outlet, you always think, oh, you want to punch something, like go to the gym, get your energy out if you're frustrated. But reading can do just that. Knitting can do that. Doing things on the Cricut can do that. Golfing can do that. I think that if we still don't have a current way to do that, we still have a lot of time to figure that out. And there's not a deadline to figure it out. Like, you can try a bunch of things and see what works. And if it doesn't, like, on to the next one and keep trying. I think we often just get so frustrated that we kind of give up on exploring. And I think that we should prioritize that. Like, that's still just as important. And I think that another thing is, we oftentimes just grow up being so dependent on somebody, right? Like, it's part of life. Like, you're a child, you can't do anything on your own. But now that you are on your own, like, come to the conclusion that this is the time to be your own parent. And I think you can be that parent for yourself when your inner child is kind of screaming at you and trying to, act out on things that they didn't know was the right way to act. So that's another thing. And I think that just in general, like coming to the agreement with yourself that you are essentially now in charge of your life. Like, we have spent our whole lives being so dependent on somebody that sometimes, when you grow up, you're continuing to be dependent on somebody. And I always thought about that being like a negative acquired characteristic of somebody based on their experience. But honestly, like, everyone has that dependency feeling. And, people lose it or it gets worse at a certain point, just depending on like your life. But that's just how it is naturally, because we grow up being raised and having to depend on somebody because we couldn't do anything by ourselves. So I think that is another way to reconnect with your inner child. Like, when things seem out of control, when your emotions seem out of control, like, recognize that it's happening and, figure out ways that you can help balance your emotions and just take care of yourself and be your own parent for once. And when all else fails, just think about, what would a child do? Go back to your roots. If a child is upset, I don't know, I guess for me, like, the prime example is treating myself to food if I'm upset or having a bad day. And granted, sometimes you have to think about how many bad days you've had, but when you're a kid and you get upset, your parents will try to make you feel better. They're like, okay, how about an ice cream? Like, will that help you feel better? And again, sometimes it's a trial and error, but like, growing up, what made you feel better. Like, sometimes you need to go out and get those large fries. Sometimes you need to go and just go to a bouncy house or something, or climb a tree. And children are very much connected with nature. At least my childhood was. I truly don't know about how kids are nowadays with technology, but I used to go camping. I was a huge camper, believe it or not. Even though I'm petrified of bugs, I will still run away from any bug I see, whether it be a fly, mosquito, whatever. I am petrified, but besides the point, maybe sometimes you just need to be outside for a little because of how demanding life is, how technology is, how work is. I definitely personally feel like I've had less time to be outside. And even on days where I do have the free time, I almost don't immediately lean to that direction of like, oh, I want to go on a walk or I want to go camping and this and that. And I think that even that sometimes really wakes up the inner child, and not even just your inner child. It's also just really good for you to like wake up and smell the flowers every now and then. And it's just like things like that I feel like we forget to do. And it's just super helpful to like take a minute and just smell the air for a second, because, not to be a little dark, but like when life's over, the world still turns. And I recently saw an article on LinkedIn, and it was basically like, your job with you, your job when you leave. And it's literally the same gif of the earth rotating. And that's so accurate, like in just everything. It's not even just work. Like, that's how life is. The world will keep turning no matter what. So why not live it a little bit with relaxing, with being a kid for a little, and just finding the fun in basic things. And another thing is like, you could even just try to do all the things that you used to do just randomly. Have you ever like sat down, and this has happened to me recently, sat down in the summertime and just had free time, and you're literally like, what did I used to do? Because I physically can't find something to do in my free time. And because of that, I resort to literally just rotting on the couch on TikTok. And I absolutely hate that. So you could also ask yourself what you used to do and try to do that. For me, I used to spend a lot of time outside biking. I still want to do that, but I think one, I don't have a bike anymore. Two, I would like to do that in the fall time because summer has been rightfully like horrible. So I just be staying at home the whole time. But even that, and then maybe even something from your child. It doesn't even have to be an activity. Is there something from your childhood that you used to eat or used to drink that really just made you happy? Like that matcha frap from Starbucks, that one sushi roll, or that bubble tea that you haven't had in a very long time, or the baths you used to take, like all the things. I feel like there's so many options, but we don't like give ourselves the push to go and try to, like let ourselves have fun. And again, it's difficult. And working at Disney has also opened my eyes to these things because it's just like something that we don't really realize, that like we always tell ourselves we don't have enough time for this. We don't have enough time to, relax, or time to really like read or bike. But there's always time to do it. And maybe it's outside of our routine. Like the biggest thing I can tell you right now that I do is like going to the gym. I like specifically this week, I've been waking up at 4:50 to try to get to the gym. And I know it's torture. However, it makes me feel so good to have that morning routine because I'm not feeling like I'm immediately waking up and going straight to work. I absolutely hate that. I've always hated that. I've always hated waking up and going straight to like boring things, quote unquote. Boring things meaning it, something mentally stimulating that like exhausts you without doing something beforehand or after that I really like to do. And I think going to the gym has been incredibly helpful with that. And another thing is how many times you go and see your friends. Like it's been so different now. Sadly, a lot of my close friends, we barely see each other, and totally nobody's fault. It's just part of life. There's just friends that you have different schedules. Sometimes you can't help it. Like perfect example is a teacher and an overnight nurse. Like by the time the teacher is home, the nurse is getting ready to leave for work or something. And you just don't have as much freedom to be able to hang out as much. But when you do, you're almost so tired from everything else that you don't even want to make plans to hang out with, friends you haven't seen in a while. And even that, like pushing yourself to hang out with friends, if that's what you like to do, right? If that's what your inner child likes to do, even that has given me, for example, because I really do like to do that. It makes me feel so great to, just remind an old friend, like, hey, it's been so long, haven't talked to you, let's hang out, or like, how are you? And just open the conversation. And I'm really grateful for the friends who understand that life is busy. And like, I feel like I'm so lucky to still have these friends because when we do text and connect, it doesn't feel like time is lost. And there's that mutual understanding that like, hey, life is busy, but we're really making the active effort to, like continue seeing each other. And I think that in a way has healed me because I feel like, and I don't think this is related really to my inner child like being like 10 or 12 years old, but honestly, even in college, like I know we're not children at that age, but I have had so many issues just like realizing that growing up means not running on the same schedules as your friends anymore, and you don't get to see them as much. And I had a really, really hard time accepting that. But that's why, it makes me feel so much better, like making plans with my friends, because that is what makes me happy. That's what always has made me happy. So That's another thing you can do to kind of reconnect with your inner child. It's just whatever you think of that comes to mind when you ask yourself, like, what used to make you happy as a child. It's never too late and never will be too late. You could be 60 and like trying to find your inner child. It's never too late to try again to reconnect to all the things that made you happy as a kid. And I just think it's crazy because we lean so far away from just the basic, simple things in life that I guess that's why nostalgia like kind of grows in you, right? Because you know you don't have the time for those things anymore, or you just don't connect with those things anymore. So that's the little things that I think we often forget to do. And I feel like, especially the fact that we don't get the time that much to really like have that we forget that we were pretty happy with almost nothing. And like nothing meaning like without having a million things on our plate or a million things to worry about. Like, when's the last time we pictured a happy moment when we were kids? Like, when's the last time you actually sat down and thought about it and just, gave yourself a hug with that image, with that memory? Like, one thing I can think of is me being with my grandparents, like at their apartment, and they're teaching me these card games, and even just like being at home and having my stuffed dog. I had a stuffed dog toy that I literally carried around with me everywhere. I'll never forget. It was a lab. And again, I just, wherever I biked, wherever I was, I had that toy with me. And yeah, just remembering what used to bring fun in your life. We as adults don't get to be as playful anymore. Why? I don't know. I still make the time to go to Top Golf or like a Yestercades. By me, there's a bar where it's like arcade games, and I used to love going to the arcade when I was younger. Like even talking about this, I'm remembering stuff that I literally haven't remembered in a very long time. And I kind of get sad thinking about it because while I was so involved in my music, I was going through a traumatic relationship where I didn't even know that it was making me unhappy for a really long time. Again, like it was partially the other partner's fault, but also mine too, because I didn't realize like there's some things that I let pass, but at the same time, you have to kind of give yourself grace. And I think that that's why it's been so hard for me to like reconnect with music, because I think it brings back something, like it brings back something related to how I felt during that time, that it's almost hard to remember how much I enjoyed it because of everything else that was going on around it. So just things like that. And children love to play, so like, go to tennis or something, pick up a coloring book and do your coloring. Literally just go to the playground for a little bit and swing on a swing set. And again, like I feel like it's just so cool thinking about parents because they get to do that again, but there's such a long gap between you kind of growing up. I mean, in most cases, like there's still the other cases where you get pregnant at a younger age, or it really just depends, but there is some time between you growing up and you having kids that still needs that inner child connection, if that makes sense. So that's the only way we really get to realize who we are, because adulting, we're still learning how to live this life, and we can only live it every day based on our previous experiences. So why not just fall back into that sometimes? Why not just spend the afternoon coloring if you have nothing else to do? If that's the case, and if you don't ever have a day where you have nothing to do, definitely make the time for that. If we don't, we lose connection with ourselves. And it's so easy to get caught up in the future, in tomorrow, in, all the things that cause anxiety. If there's a list of things that cause anxiety, 9 times out of 10, it will be adult related things, because children just don't worry about that. And I just wonder, like, sometimes I wonder where the switch kind of flipped, because I don't even remember the last time that I didn't have, to worry about anything, or I lived in the present. And it's just very different now. And I would love to, reconnect with that, because it does. I really just get lost in it. You forget, and in all the best ways, you're lost in your own little bubble sometimes. And I think it's so important for us, especially when we're already having to, put on our best face at work. And especially when we work, we can't really talk about all the things that bother us or all the things that make us happy, because at least for, most of the day, you can't really, because you're too busy talking about work things. And then, you go home and you have to figure out what to cook for dinner. And then you really only have like 1 or 2 hours before bed to really think about what you love to do. And I think it's just not what I want for myself. And I think in a way it's good that I'm talking about this, because it's just like a reminder that I have to make more time for that. And I think it'll just be important and exciting, because when we heal ourselves, we can treat everyone else better. We can pass that on to our kids. And I think it's just one of the few things that I feel like is so out of touch when you're in your 20s, that we should definitely continue to keep exploring and keep challenging ourselves and keep learning and keep asking questions. As an analyst, they always look for people who are asking questions. And I think that is a very childlike characteristic, believe it or not, if you are constantly asking questions. Because if you kind of just settle, that's it. You don't have any more exploration, discovery. And that's something that, a lot of times you get stuck in that routine, in that same mindset, because when you're not asking the questions, you're not looking for improvements, you're not looking for, things potentially that might interest you, because you're just there now. That's what happens. And because of that, I feel like when we do reconnect with our inner child, it just gives us more joy, more hope, more happiness. And we all need that in our lives. I think end of the day, that's what matters. Just reminding ourselves that we are still children at heart. We will always be children at heart. And nothing really in our adult life should be taking that away from us. So embrace your inner child and remind yourself that you deserve to be a kid every now and then. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this episode, and let me know in the Spotify comments, if you're listening there, what you do as a kid to make you happy and why it's important for you, because we deserve it. And yeah, thank you guys so much for listening. If you have any comments, questions, feel free to add it to the Spotify or Apple podcast, wherever you're listening. And I hope you guys have a very great, fun weekend. And I'll talk to you guys next week.